Hello everyone, welcome to our Let's Play series of Disco Elysium. This is Colonel RPG as usual, and I'm very happy that he chose to join me today as we walk slow. It might be dangerous. It might be dangerous. Last episode I slept, and bad things happened, I'm pretty sure. I think it's the end of the game or something to that extent. Oh, this actually goes places. The game telling me to walk slow there. We're in a position where, after being shot, the game actually reacted to us running. It's not dangerous out here, it's fine. So I don't know what the game was trying to say. A rubber dinghy. It's deflated and broken. Small white flowers blossom all around you. It's a lovely place. Oh, come on. It's gotta be the killer. An old man wearing tracksuit trousers leans on the frame stock of his rifle. He gathers a big ball of spit in his mouth, and then spits it out into the extinguished fire before him. He raises his black eyes, hooded by creased eyelids, to meet yours. Unclouded by cataracts, his eyesight is sharp. It says our perception. Which, I suppose... He's practically tearing up from spite. Hatred got the best of him a long time ago. This man hates everything, says our empathy. Are you the fire guy?
What now? I can't hear you.
He cups his ear. Did you recently tell two kids to put their fire out? Two twins?
I may have. All sorts of little rats have come sniffing around trying to give up the position.
The position? It sounds like a hiding place.
Fire guy, regressive bourgeoisie henchman, can't even talk like a grown-up.
Henchmen? Yeah, they were kids. Unless I'm the henchman and I can't even talk like a grown-up, in which case I guess it makes sense. You've retained your eyesight.
My eyesight, yes, helps me see all this shit.
Did you close the blast door?
I did. And you opened it. How?
I fueled the generator and then used the console.
I should have burned that console down.
He shakes his head. How did you know I was coming?
The boat engine on the water.
Nice gun you got there?
It's not nice, it's a piece of shit. Gets the job done.
Is that a Bellman Grav?
It's a Trigon 446.
A Sumerian rifle? How did you get hold of one?
It was sent to us by our brothers in the Xinyao commune. Military aid.
He pats the rifle. It has stayed true to him, our hand-eye coordination says. He can still make it sing. The Xinyao commune.
You heard me. It's good now. Like chalk wiped from a board.
His glaze turns inward. I don't know what he means by that, though. I cannot understand what he means by this sentence. Sir, I need you to put down that gun so we can talk further. We're with the police. The lieutenant pulls his pistol from the holster.
You're a glorified night watchman. This is a service rifle. I can only lay it down before an enemy commander of corresponding rank.
So we can ask, or we can pull our authority over here, which I don't think I am very good at, because that is a challenging check, and my authorities right now is 3. Mostly also because I don't know what is actually... No, I don't think that thing lowers my authority. He doesn't say what his rank is. Kim? The lieutenant aims his pistol square at the man's forehead.
Put it down now, sir.
or you're going to blow my brains out before you question me. To hell with it. It's a walking stick anyway. It's out of bullets.
The old man lays the rifle down carelessly and then looks at it lying there. I'm gonna pick the gun lying in the sand. His gaze follows your motions. The rifle feels surprisingly light in your hand, frame stocked and patched in places with tape and wire. The rifle's in a shabby state, like a crutch that's seen too much travel. Hieroglyphs are embossed into the forearm made of walnut. On the butt you see Vespertine writing burnt into the wood. Triangong 446 millimeter, made in Xinyao. This uses jacketed ammunition, 446. The right type and the right caliber. The lieutenant nods, glancing at the gun. He's liking this, says our empathy. I'm gonna stow the gun away. The old man keeps following your motions with his gaze. His left arm twitches suddenly. Some kind of involuntary response. Something is slightly off with his motorics. This looked very much like a murder weapon. It can be used against him to get a confession in time. Who are you? My name, he looks across the water and then back at you, is Josef Lilianovic Dross, political commissar of the 114th Anti-Aircraft Division of the 4th Army of the Commune of Revachol. I am a deserter, a partisan and a prisoner of war. This is my termless surrender. His eyes turn to the reeds again, dead and dull. The Commune of Revachol. The lieutenant forgets to close his mouth. Do you mean the ICM? You're a holdover from the Inselinden Citizens Militia. The Army of the Revolution. I was recruited in Jamrock in 07. Trained in the École de Contrôle Aérien. That's French for aerial control school. And considered the emergency defense duties in 08. I left my unit on the eve of landing. When I returned here on the May 14th, the commune had fallen. Still armed and ideologically trained, I wrote a criticism of myself and resumed partisan duties. I don't know what he means by that. This might be related to either something political or some habit that people... I don't know what this means. 51 minus 8 equals 43. Oh, right. It's me realizing how long it's been. Thank you. It's more important what day it is, or what date it is. You've been on this island for 43 years? No. He looks into the fire. A wisp of smoke rises from somewhere between the charred logs. I've been on other islands, too. I was on Resurrection until they turned it into a spa in 18. Then I was on E48, a nameless sound, until the sea washed over it. And then I came back here. That was 22 years ago. You said this is your termless surrender. You're with the RCM. He waves in your general direction. The coalition appointed... Oh no, he says, the coalition appointed mob that enforces bourgeois morals in Revachol. Are we not coalition appointed? I think we are. Huh, look at all these options over here. Option 1 is we're not coalition appointed. We just try to help people. Which is false. We are coalition appointed. And we don't just try to help people. We do other things as well. The second one is that's right, we're with the good guys. Because the implication there, although I think this would be a naive implication, I don't think our character would say this and it's like being like, no, the bourgeois morals, that's the good morals. I think this is just a typical runaway, not typical runaway, what's a typical throwaway line in defense of the status quo, basically. We enforce the law is the third option. We keep these animals from killing each other. Now, this is divided in two. We enforce the law over here is indeed, like, if I just said that, we enforce the law, he would say, like I said, force the bourgeois morals in Revachol. But the second one is plainly dehumanizing of the people here. I know what it looks like is the fourth option, but I have secret plans to turn the RCM into a Mazovian revolutionary unit. So, as always, and this is the I don't like any of these options option, as always, the game is very polarizing in all the options. I'm gonna go with this one because that's where our character goes, but very, very polarizing, and honestly, super naive. It's impossible. It will never work to turn the police for, well, I take it back. Yes, it will work. It's just not going to get you to any revolution. It's just going to change the people on top, which is the problem. Turning the RCM into somehow a revolutionary unit would necessarily mean that you'd need to maintain the incentives that made the people who are in the RCM right now be there. So you need the incentives that made them be there to maintain, to exist, to continue existing, those incentives. Now, what are those incentives? Well, it's kind of complicated, but it has to do with money. It doesn't just have to do with money, but it mostly has to do with money. Now, that is a problem, as you can probably see, because it means that, well, it's what he's saying here. You're going to enforce always the will, well, not necessarily enforce, at least you're going to always be paid by the people who have the money to pay you, because the people who don't have the money to pay you can't pay you. It's like a thing that it doesn't work like that. That's not how money works. So the revolution here would just be like turning it's just the turning of the wheel rather than the breaking of the wheel or something like that. But I'm still going to go with that. Rock and roll posturing. He stares at the embers and then into your eyes. You're the RCM. You represent the moralist internal, the enemies of humanity who took this city. I represent their adversary, Le Parti Communiste d'Insulinde. The Communist Party of Insulinde. That's what it means. And Insulinde here, that is the old country, I think. Or at least, I assume the group of islands that we're in, or something like that. Because Insulinde, it just means island. It comes from island. So it's just like the group of countries, and I think what they were controlled originally by, or who controlled them, was the communists. Take me to them as a prisoner of war. I have relinquished my weapon. I can no longer serve. No superiors can relieve me of my duty. You bulldoze them all to a mass grave for trying to free humanity. This is pretty important. No superiors can relieve me of my duty. Because they're all dead. But specifically for trying to free humanity. I think this is the origins of the... this is just, like, the parallel to real life of the 1917 revolution. Like, it's so obvious that the game is referencing stuff like that, but it just never really... I feel that there should be more made-up stuff in this setting, really, and not be as close to reality, because the only way to really understand this and read between the lines is to actually think of what the real-life counterparts of all this stuff actually did. And I've been reading... I mentioned this in previous episodes, and I've been reading about the political... specifically the political... the word posturing here might... that's not the word that I want to use, but it could be the word posturing. The political posturing by the government of the USSR from specifically 1918 forward, but also 1917 forward. And the way people were convinced of the goals of the government, not just people of the government, or rather, more importantly, people of the government, but also the people in general, the people of the country, but specifically the people of the government, the the fight between Trotsky and Stalin, and I say fight, but really the quarrels, and not necessarily. It's not about the quarrels; it's about the differences of philosophy and ideology, and at the end of the day, of goals between Trotsky and Stalin. I've been reading some about that. This game doesn't talk about that, so I haven't read too much. But specifically regarding the revolution and the freeing of humanity, I think this has to be the freeing of humanity from capitalism, which is kind of complicated to say, because that attitude, as far as I can tell, but you may feel free to correct me in the comments and add to this, because of course I don't know everything, and there's a lot of perspectives on all this stuff, so I'm just giving you my perspective. I can't say that this is an attitude like this. It's not freeing. It's not the freeing of humanity. It's the freeing. It's kind of complicated because it does work on some levels. Because the idea behind the revolution is to make everybody free. In fact, that tends to be the goals of a lot of the left-leaning revolutions throughout the world, specifically at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, and then with the evolution of the influence of such a huge power such as the USSR, things change considerably in the political spectrum when it comes to convincing people that you want to free them. So it's very complicated to use this sort of terms in real in real life, because this has to have a context, and that context here, you can't just say it's freeing from capitalism, because it's not really. That is, I think the freeing from capitalism is more of a modern day, at the time we're recording anyway, of a modern day sort of line of thinking for left-leaning ideologies. Although, obviously there have always been people that have seen the world like this, from this perspective, from the perspective of you have to free humanity from capitalism. But I'm talking about like mainstream ideologies rather than specific ideas, because of course specific ideas have always existed in one way or another. But I think just to paint the revolution, or not really the revolution, the communists as freeing humanity, especially when they're portrayed as very much authoritarian. I think they're portrayed as very much authoritarian, and certainly if they're inspired by Stalin, they're authoritarian. But specifically, like that just creates the same level of conflict in just or internal conflict in the narrative that real life USSR had. It's just. And honestly, I don't think the game wants to deal with that. It's like just forget about it. Just don't. Yeah, no. The USSR. It's like it really does feel like they are just completely forgetting about. It's in the text. Seriously, it's in the text that the communists here, the communards they were called. It's in the text that they were authoritarian. I think. When I say it's in the text, I mean the game says it out loud. It is a long game, so only on a second playthrough would I actually be able to pick it and see if that is the case or not. But certainly, if it is inspired by real life, by the real life counterpart, it would be the case. That's not to say, obviously, that you can't have communism without authoritarianism, but some people think that it's utopic, which doesn't mean that it's impossible, because that we've discussed that as well. I've talked about how utopia doesn't mean impossibility. But in the sense that from a political perspective, it does mean that you might have to isolate yourself. It's kind of from people who disagree with you, which might not be possible because of they live they live with you. If there's like that you occupy the same territory, you can't be like, no, I want to be like this, and you want to be something else, go elsewhere. But under certain conditions, especially in regards to fiction, because you can make up any mass migration situations and stuff like that. And communism isn't even that hard, honestly. If you start getting into proper anarchism, then it gets a lot harder to see that future, honestly, in my opinion, anyway. It's not that I personally consider it impossible. It's very difficult. His hand shakes and he breaks into a coughing fit. A spray of blood from his mouth on the black charcoal in the fire pit. Renee, the royalist on the coast says our rhetoric. The communard signed the Revacholian instrument of surrender. Liberal reactionaries signed that instrument. And you see that? This, specifically, actually, it's interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting. The term itself, liberalism, exists before, certainly before the 1917 revolution. Liberalism started, I believe, in the mid-19th century, as a reaction to the ever-encroaching power of the moneyed class in capitalism. And liberalism tried to fight for workers' rights and gender equality and a bunch of other stuff that, under capitalism, at the time anyway, was really just becoming worse and worse and worse. And the way some people see it is that basically liberalism sides with capitalism in the sense that it doesn't want to destroy it, it just wants to fix it, or just make it bearable, without actually fixing the underlying reasons why those rights were being erased over time, and were very much erased. The 18th century is a terrible century for workers' rights historically. So liberalism comes in and sort of saves the day. But for really left-leaning people and in really left-leaning ideologies, which liberalism can be considered a left-leaning ideology, but it's complicated because, and certainly we need to talk about what period of history we're talking about. But for really left-leaning ideologies, it's still considered siding with the ruling class, because you don't want to break it all down, and that's why the revolution and all that. That's where it comes from. That's where those terms come from. But it does, like, immediately, it sort of does paint them as authoritarian, because obviously liberal means freedom, and just it comes from that word. It doesn't actually mean that, depending on what context you're talking about, and certainly it doesn't mean that when you're comparing, well, how about we have an anarchistic society without anybody being, ruling over other people? Isn't that more free than a society like we have in, classic liberalism? And then, talking about freedom and comparing those two. Of course, you can criticize that one doesn't work or the other doesn't work, whatever. But still, it's a name that sort of invokes that vision here, specifically in this vision. But it needs to be understood under. That's the problem. The problem is that it isn't understood in the freaking text of the game. It's just, you can just draw the analogies from the real life counterparts. And even those are complicated, because the history of liberalism is dotted and it is complicated, and it's not taught properly in modern day schools. So it's very complicated to understand it, even as a single movement. Well, as many political movements are complicated to be understood as a single movement, but liberalism in particular is very complicated because it tends to be a very middle of the road sort of attitude, which basically means that it defends different things depending on the country and the place and the time, I should say. So it's really complicated. But in the game, it just sounds like these liberals just wanted to not be under the rule of whoever the Communist Party was. You know what I mean? It's just like, in the text of the game, it just feels like they were authoritarian. Although again, it doesn't impede you from drawing from real life counterparts. Traitors who should have been burned alive. He draws his breath. I answered to the Communist Party. Is that part of why you've been here all this time? Because the party didn't surrender. He just wipes the blood from his chin. That's insane. You're insane. He stares at the fire pit. Radio shows, speed racing, sporting goods. None of it is real. This is complicated. Like, there's definitely political ideologies that are, how do they call, anti-materialists? Anyway, there's definitely at least political currents of thought that try to deprioritize luxury goods over, well, I say luxury goods, but sort of non-essential goods over essential goods. And I'm not sure, I'm not educated enough to know where that comes from and where it started. It's certainly, like, from a historical perspective, it definitely, and specifically regarding the Cold War, it definitely makes sense that people that lived in second world countries would tend to see typical things from first world countries as decadent, and specifically the word decadent there very often used in this regard. But that's just an historical thing. Like that's like, just because, like, radio shows, yeah, but books weren't. And what's the difference between radio shows and books? Nothing. There's no difference. It's like, oh, they play football. We like rugby. It's basically that distinction. There's no I mean, there's an underlying the thing is, there's an underlying current of thought where capitalism tends to create unnecessary goods because they're profitable. The machine of advertisement is essential to capitalism, and so in communism, that machine doesn't work or doesn't exist. What ends up happening is that certain things, although not necessarily radio shows and speed racing and sporting goods, because these are actually the things that you probably would have in a communist society the most, because these things don't require, I mean, just, they don't require advertisement. It's like, I mean, radio shows only, like, you have fewer radio shows in capitalism than you would have in communism, because radio shows are necessarily driven by how profitable they are. And so if you want to make a radio show that is not profitable, and by that I mean that doesn't sell advertisement, because that's probably where it comes from, then you wouldn't have that radio show, because it's not profitable. So we need to ignore these actual examples, because they're just, I think they're rooted more in history than anything else, which shouldn't exist in this game, or it shouldn't be the case in this game, because it's the game. But still, the point is, there's things that are made under capitalism that solely exist, or that it's not necessarily solely exist. The thing is, things are made because they're profitable, rather than because they are needed, or because they're good. They may be needed and they may be good, but if they're not profitable, they're not made. And that's, I think that understanding can color the understanding of non-essential goods and the production of non-essential goods in a lot of people. And me personally, I know people who have very much this attitude. It's the thing is, this is not an exclusively left-wing attitude. Especially here in Portugal, our own brand of fascism had a lot of influence from the isolationism of Portugal. So it kind of worked like that at the same time. While our dictator here and who came after were very much against the USSR. This is all in the 20th century. The mainstream philosophy and political view of consumption in the capitalist market was very much what's the word? There's a word for it. Basically, not spending a lot. You should save and you buy only what's necessary, and that definitely shaped the perception of a lot of people here in Portugal, and that's probably where. I know a lot of people with this sort of attitude are just like, that's just, you don't need that stuff, don't buy that sort of stuff. Which, needless to say, because Portugal was and is a capitalist country, our economy was extremely devastated by this sort of ideology. But the reason why that ideology exists in the first place, that was more out of necessity than necessarily out of any political will or political ideology. It wasn't because fascism is anti-consumption, because it isn't, but in our case it was. It's just because of the material conditions that our country, and at the time our empire, because Portugal was a colonialist country for almost 5 centuries, and up until 74 when the revolution was made. And honestly, even after, but still, it's kind of complicated. It's a progress. But still, the thing is, I understand this from a very personal perspective. And, yeah. Anyway, we're out of time for the day, so we're going to have to talk to the deserter a little bit more in the next episode. For right now, I'm Colonel RPG, and this has been Disco Elysium. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and if you did, go ahead and leave a comment, like the video if you want to see the next episode come out sooner rather than later. But above all, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you next episode. Bye-bye.